Michael Obernicia is a comedian, film director, and producer turned common and natural law aficionado and is the founder of the Universal Community Trust and the draftsman of the UCT Treaty. The work Michael is doing to help us exit the matrix is incredible. He is building what is, to my knowledge, the first of its kind international jurisdiction that exists outside of any of the worldly authoritarian jurisdictions. So, what we're talking about here is largely related to both voluntarism and common/natural law. And I look at what Michael has created, which we get into during the episode, as the bridge to get us to a voluntarist society. And it's incredible because I've been wrestling with many of these ideas related to how to bridge voluntarism with common and natural law. And really, common law and voluntarism are based in the same thing. It's the non-aggression principle, because what would be considered a quote common law crime? Anything that is based in violating the non-aggression principle, right? So this was a really incredible conversation. And according to the Universal Community Trust website, which you can find in the show notes, UCT is an umbrella trust declaring independent sovereignty and jurisdiction under natural law for all of the autonomous sovereign community trusts, or anarcho-nations, anarcho-trusts, which sit under the UCT umbrella. So what that means, Michael will be able to explain it more eloquently than I can here, but essentially there are nations that fall under the Universal Community Trust umbrella, which is its own jurisdiction. And again, that jurisdiction exists separate of and outside of the international jurisdictions that all other, I guess, to my knowledge, virtually all other authoritarian structures and governments fall under. So again, this is the bridge from, between common law and voluntarism. So if you would like to get involved with UCT or learn more about Michael and his work, of course, be sure to head to the show notes. And if you want subjugation and domination from men and women in government, then just turn this episode off. I would imagine that wouldn't be most of you. So if you're interested in freedom, you're going to love this episode and love what Michael is doing to help pave the way forward for mankind. Let's start with you telling your story.
Okay, so you want me to go from pretty much the beginning, how it all came about?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Well, it is a very long, but I'm told a very extraordinary story. The tale that I have to tell about how I ended up where I did has to begin when I was a child. Because when I was a child, there were certain efforts that were made trying to induct me into a society that I didn't belong to. In other words, the elite tried to induct me very early on in my life when I scored very high in an intelligence test, a national intelligence test, and I was offered a scholarship to the primary public school in Britain. And that scholarship included Oxford or Cambridge, whichever I chose. But I was only 7 years old at the time, and I was being offered this, and I knew I didn't want it. It didn't seem right. Why would these people want to offer me all these things when I'm only a little boy? And I just instinctively turned it down, knowing that I would live to regret it if I didn't. And when that happened, my life didn't really change at all, except everybody around me seemed a little bit perplexed as to why I didn't take the opportunity when it came. Another opportunity came when I was 18 years old at the end of my school career, when I had appalling grades because I had truanted most of the time because it wasn't worth going to school where I went to school. And I found far more interesting things that I could learn when I didn't bother going to school. And yet I was offered pretty much golden tickets to go to Oxford to read English, and this was by an Oxford graduate who had connections, who was very, very close to me. And I said to him, why are you offering me this when there are so many people who work so much harder, and you're offering it to me? And he said, I'm offering it to you because I think you have a gift with words, and I think it would be a shame if you didn't use that gift. And I said, well, thanks very much, but I'd rather use it in a different way. And if I did take your offer, which I really do appreciate, if I did take your offer, I would end up in one of two positions. First position is I would either end up in prison. The second position is if I didn't end up in prison, I would end up dead. And he looked at me and he said, why do you think that? And I said, because I have challenged since the day I could speak every single authority figure who tried to impose anything upon me. And you're suggesting I go to Oxford University where they will try and mold me into something that I will refuse to become. And he looked at me with a smile and he said, good point, Michael. I never thought of that. And from that point, I knew throughout my life that the position that I'd taken since I was a little boy, where I just wouldn't do something just because an authority figure said that I should, or offered me something that sounded great, because very often it's not as good as it sounds, as we all know, as we learn in life, as the years progress. Now, when I rejected the golden ticket, as it were, I thought pretty much that would be it, that I wouldn't have any more offers from the self-appointed elite, and I would just be able to get on with my creative pursuits, because I've always, since I was a little boy, been a writer. I've written creative fiction, I've written non-fiction, and I love to write. I always have loved to write. And it was always something I was going to do. I didn't need any certificates from any academic institution to show me that I could do it or show anybody else. I just went and did it. I went and wrote plays. I went and did stand-up comedy. I was working with the best from the beginning because I just reached out. I reached out for it, and I worked hard, and I was willing to do things that other people weren't willing to do. I.e., I was willing to say, I know that you don't know who I am, but I know that I can stand on a stage or get up and talk with the best of them. And I know this because it's what I'm supposed to do. And when I said this in my mid-20s, people laughed and said, well, why would anybody listen to you? And I said, because I've got things to say about the world that need to be said. And I'm going to say them through creative mediums, and I'm going to put them out in any way I can to anyone who will listen. Now, right at that point, where I was in my mid-20s, and I gained some critical acclaim for two plays that I'd written, and a theatre company I'd founded performed them at various theatres in London, sellout runs everywhere, and everyone loved the play. Well, two plays, one called Nightlights, one called The Truth Game. Now, The Truth Game led me to a film career because it was so popular that it attracted some independent film producers to come and see it on the last night of a 3-week run in London. And they said to me, Michael, we think that this has got legs, as a project, and we'd like to develop it from the theatre to a screenplay if you're interested. So I bit their hands off.
Was The Truth Game about 9/11?
No. The Truth Game wasn't about 9/11. The Truth Game is what led me to what I found out.
Okay.
9/11, which is why I'm giving you the background to that. So the Truth Game, it transformed my life virtually overnight. All of a sudden, I went from being an unknown writer to being an independent film producer who was going to the Cannes Film Festival for the first time. And I must admit, I was very excited at the opportunity, and I was hopeful that I would get there and I would realize that, it is about how hard you work, that you can, if you graft hard enough, you can achieve whatever you set out to achieve. And unfortunately, what I found out is what everyone finds out. It's always a rigged game from beginning to end. They choose the people who are going to be successful in their world. And it doesn't matter how good you are, unless you're prepared to build something outside of their system, it doesn't work. Now, the reason I know this through my own bitter experience is because over the course of around about 8 years, from the late 90s to 2004, I managed to obtain a certain successful status as an independent film producer. I had a slate of 8 films. 4 of them were A-list films. 4 of them were totally independent, with unknowns involved in the projects. But all of them we'd raised finance for. Me and my partner in a company called Unspeakably Wicked Pictures, we'd raised 125 million pounds worth of equity to make these 8 films over the next 2 years. This is in 2004. And we went to the Cannes Film Festival. We had an absolute blast with a Danish language film called The Good Cop, with an actor called Kim Bodnia, who has since gone on to become a massive star worldwide, being in things like, he starred in things like Killing Eve and The Witcher. People might know him from those series. And we were working with him right at the very beginning. And because we had such a big success with the Good Cop at Cannes that year, we attracted the attention of some big hitters. And basically, I was pulled aside by someone who went on to disclose to me that he was a member of the Bilderberg Group. And he was, put it this way, he was interested in one thing. He was interested in finding out whether or not I was one of them. And this is where the 9/11 issue comes in. Because after 9/11, 3 days after 9/11, when I was still a hungry film producer, I had come across online a woman who turned out to be the ex-wife of Kissinger's right-hand man at Kissinger Associates for 20 odd years. And she wanted to tell me her story because she had inside information that she wanted a writer to put out there. And she was very happy to find out that I was also a filmmaker, because she was more than enthusiastic about me taking her story and making it into a film. Now, what she told me 3 days after 9/11 and over the subsequent months as we continued our conversations was exactly who, why, and how 9/11 came about. The people involved, the architect behind it, in other words, the guy who set up the operations, the guy who commissioned the operations, the guy who provided the business front to pay all of the operatives, the name of the deal that was the cover story for the entire payout to all of those operatives. And all of these pieces of information, she told me to go and check and to not believe a word she was telling me until I checked for myself. And of course, every single one of them checked out. So in other words, 3 days after 9/11, I was given all of the details that the entire 9/11 truth movement was searching for, and no one would believe me.
Do you have any of those details still?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Let's hear some of them. Yeah, because I know we're gonna get into some other stuff, but this is fascinating to me here.
Okay, so this will give you an idea of why I explained the background to this. So I'm already on their radar. I'm that kid who keeps saying no to their offers, and I knew all the information that I've just described about 9/11. And I also knew that there was only me, the woman who told me, and one other individual in the world who knew this information. But they were all claiming, as were MI5 and MI6, who placed me under surveillance from the moment I started talking to her, because she was already under heavy surveillance because there had been an attempt to assassinate her. And I should tell you about that. This is one of the things she told me about. So when she came back from an overseas, sorry, her and her husband had spent a lot of time apart because he had been overseas and she had been overseas. She's European aristocracy. And he was, I believe, East Coast, New York millionaire. But his background, he had diplomatic immunity as obviously one of the linchpins in Kissinger Associates. He was, at the time, a governor in the US. So he was very, very prominent, although he tried to keep himself as low-key as possible. He literally had the ear of everybody, including Lord Rothschild. So there wasn't anyone that he couldn't talk to. There wasn't anyone of that ilk who didn't trust him. So basically, let's call her, we'll call her Paula. That's not her name, but we'll call her Paula. Paula, basically, she told me that there was this, she used to go for lunch with the wives of the billionaires on the East or the West Coast, or both of them every now and again. And she went to lunch with the billionaire's wives this one day, and this is in 98. And she was absolutely appalled because she overheard a conversation with two people who, at the time, she called her friends, talking about how there was going to be a major event, probably in New York, which would result in Kissinger's plan to get rid of the useless eaters coming to fruition. Now, she never wanted to be part of any elite, self-appointed elite or otherwise. All she ever wanted to do was to be a wife and mother, in her own words, but she wasn't allowed to. Everyone in her family was a doctor. She was the only one who wasn't a doctor. And she married, she thought, for love, and she genuinely believed her husband loved her at this point. So she runs home, and she immediately goes upstairs to speak to him, and she tells him what they've been talking about. And she said to me that the look on his face made her immediately think that he was going to try and kill her. It wasn't that he was threatening, it was that he looked at her in a way that he'd never looked at her before. And he said the following words: "Whatever you do, do not tell anybody what you've just told me."
Wow.
And she said, "What do you mean? Don't tell anyone. This needs to go to the media." And she was very good friends with one of the editors at the Washington Post at the time. I know there are problems with the Washington Post, but she was friends with one of the editors. And she believed that the editor would have put out this story. So she says to him, "Well, look, if you won't do the decent thing and blow the whistle on this, then I'll just ring my friend, at the Washington Post." And he runs over as she's going to the phone and puts the phone over the receiver and says, "Whatever you do, do not do that." And she again looked at him and she said, "I've never seen you look at me like this." And he said, "Look, all I'm talking about is you don't want to upset the kind of people that would be very upset if you did that." And she said, "Are you saying this is true?" And he refused to answer. And this resulted in, critical mass in their relationship. It looked like they were going to break up immediately because of it, because she said, "If you're not willing to take a stand on this, then you're not the man that I thought you were, that I thought that I loved." And he tried to convince her otherwise over the space of about 2 or 3 weeks. And he convinced her to go on a make or break holiday in Kenya. And they were staying at a luxury hotel just outside of Nairobi. And she said for the first 3 or 4 days, he'd actually convinced her that he might be for real. And then on the morning of the fourth day, he woke her very early and said, "Listen, I'll meet you at the US Embassy later on, because I've got a breakfast meeting that I'm going to have out of town, but I'll meet you at the embassy." And he told her a certain time to get there. And during the course of their relationship, he'd never been late for anything. And that's something to bear in mind as I go through the rest of this. Never been late. He was meticulous with his timekeeping. So she went shopping in Nairobi and went to the embassy and was waiting for him. And she saw the clock tick past, 1 minute past the time he said he would be there. And she suddenly knew she was in trouble.
Mm.
Seconds later, she woke up from being unconscious. She'd been blown up, and the embassy was blown up in the first false flag Al-Qaeda attack to be blamed on bin Laden in 98. And she woke up across the street, and she was brought back to consciousness by a passing mercenary who knew about the job but had turned it down. And he turned up at the scene because he felt bad about real people getting killed, in his words, and he went to see if he could save any civilians. And he happened to save her. So he saves her life. He takes her to an out-of-town hospital. He nurses her back to health, and they end up falling for each other during this process, because it's clear that her husband is trying to kill her. And it just so turns out that this man happened to be an ex-SAS mercenary who had turned private mercenary.
What is SAS again?
It's the Secret Air Service. It's like the elite. It's the elite version of, or it's the elite part of the military in Britain.
In Britain, okay, okay.
They call them the best of the best, and their motto is "He who dares wins," I believe.
Got it.
But basically, they've been involved in all kinds of espionage over the years. And they also they talk to people like this mercenary, and they give them information that other people don't get, on a trust basis, because they've saved each other's lives while they're in the service, as it were. So that's the position that this guy was in. So he was kind of protected because of what he knew. And what he told Paula, she told me, which meant that I knew more than him, because she told me things that she hadn't told him. And what basically he said to her was that he knew what she was saying about what the millionaires' wives or billionaires' wives were saying at that lunch meeting. He knew it was true. And when she asked how, he said, because I was commissioned to be one of the key operatives on it. And I initially took the job. And then he tells her the story about how he accepted $1 million up front by someone he trusts with his life, but is the most scary man that he's ever known. We served time with him in the SAS. The man doesn't even have a name. No one can call him by his real name. If they do, they will be killed. That's how secret his name is. And he operates without one. So basically, the information that he gave her was that when the ex-SAS guy found out that there were real people who would be killed in the 9/11 operation, he pulled out. And the only reason that he wasn't assassinated immediately, because of the information that he knew, was because he had a friendship with the guy who was called the architect, the one who was the scariest guy that he knew, who he'd done service with. And that's the only reason that he stayed alive with this information. But he gave the information to Paula. She gave the information to me. And that is why I was placed under permanent surveillance. And when it got back that to her husband that this had happened, he was informed by the CIA. And when she flew back, because they had 2 children, I believe in their teens at the time, when she flew back to basically make sure her kids were all right and plan to leave her husband and bring the kids to Europe, he was waiting with the kids on the doorstep, knew everything that had happened to her, waiting with her luggage. And he'd already framed her up for a false divorce, where he was blaming her for infidelity that she hadn't committed. And if she didn't sign it, then literally he said, you'll never see your kids again. And when she signed it, she was able to take custody of them. And she immediately went back to her family in Europe. And that is when she started talking to me, knowing that she had to get out. She was under such surveillance that she said everything she did was being surveilled, which meant that I was in extreme danger because of what I knew. And she was tipped off by a man in MI5 and MI6 that she had to tell me that if I talked about that information that I knew to anyone, or made a film about it, or wrote about it online, then I would be in serious danger. Wow. Obviously, I knew this to be the case, but knowing what I knew, knowing that there was a deal called the Indian Tea Deal. The Indian Tea Deal was organized by a businessman, a Lebanese businessman, and I won't give his name now, but his name is known to me. That businessman is well known. He's easy to find because he was a protected man, protected by Evelyn Rothschild. Evelyn Rothschild is now dead, if we believe the reports. So it might be safer to talk about this, but Evelyn Rothschild is who the architect told the ex-SAS guy that Rothschild was the architect of the whole thing. Rothschild was the commissioner of the whole thing. He commissioned the architecture. The whole operation was commissioned by him. That's Evelyn, not Jacob. That's why Evelyn and his wife, Lynn, were in, at the time 9/11 happened, they were in a penthouse building overlooking the scene to watch it. And by all accounts, they were sipping champagne as they did so and laughing about it. And that is the attitude that Paula recognized among that self-appointed elite. They were laughing about this because of what it would bring about, because they wanted the end of what we would know as the masses. They don't see that we have any valid purpose upon the earth, so they want Kissinger's plan to wipe out 85 to 95% of the useless eaters to succeed. And when I was in a position at that point, knowing all that information, Alec, being like a filmmaker, I was about to make my directorial debut feature. I was about to make. I had a letter of credit from a Swiss bank for $9.5 million to make that film. I had an all-star cast, including Christopher Walken. It was my first film. Everybody loved this script. Everyone said this was going to be the next big thing. I was going to have a huge career. And then literally, I get invited to a meeting with the Bilderberger that I was telling you about earlier. And he sits me down in his apartment in Amsterdam, where I lived at the time. He sits me down and he says, Michael, you're not going to be pitching anything today because I pay people to listen to pitches, and I've already done that. The word is that pretty soon you're going to be as big as Tarantino, if not bigger. In fact, you could have a career in the film industry, a lot like Bono has in the music industry, because he handled Bono at the time. And I'm immediately thinking to myself, well, I've only ever been interested in being myself. I have no interest in emulating Bono whatsoever, or Tarantino. And I knew this was going somewhere I wouldn't like. So I said, why do I get the feeling that there's a big but coming at the end of what you're going to tell me?
Right.
He said, listen, you could have unbridled success without limits. Everything you do will be a success. You'll make shitloads of money. You have too much money to spend in 10 lifetimes. Everybody will love everything that you do, including the critics. You'll never have any crap to deal with from the press. And I said, so what's the but? And he's pointed to a door on the other side of the room, an oak door. And he said, if a door was open for you and you went through and it was closed, when you come back out, would you agree never to tell anybody about anything that you witness on the other side of the door? And I immediately got up and said, I'll get me coat, because I wouldn't agree to do that for anybody. And I knew I'd be blacklisted because of it. And he looked at me like no one had ever said no to him in his whole life. But he said, right, I respect that decision. And I think he meant it, because he knew that I knew that would mean the £125 million equity fund that I'd raised to make 8 films with my business partner would evaporate into thin air. And it did, because there was a Bilderberg meeting 3 weeks later, a bank that was cash flowing my directorial debut with the $9.5 million budget, Allied Irish Bank. Their CEO was at the Bilderberg meeting. So was the guy who I had the meeting with. He had a meeting with the Allied Irish guy and told him that I was persona non grata in every single film production package. So all the banks that were going to cash flow my films pulled out. The equity we had disappeared. And one of those films that I was credited at the time for digging out of development hell went on to get nominated for 3 Oscars and make $125 million at the box office, just as I'd predicted it would. And I remain uncredited. That film it was the film by Emilio Estevez about the Bobby Kennedy assassination, called Bobby. And that literally is how close I got. And they saw that I had an ability that was going to allow me to be very successful, even in their industry, even with their nepotistic and incestuous world, and the rules regarding that world that would be imposed upon anybody. They were inviting me in as long as I would keep my mouth shut about what I knew. And at that time, what I knew, the vast majority of what they were scared of that I knew, was about 9/11, because they'd heard all the conversations I'd had on the bugged lines that had been there since the very start. And in the end, Alec, I knew that this was probably inevitable. And when it happened, I accepted it, and I just got on with the next phase of my life, because I decided, rather than fight the system as my old self, because I was left with nothing in the end, because my career was down the toilet. I broke up from my wife at the time when that happened, as well, as often happens. And I ended up in a position where I was pretty much on my own on a beach in southern Spain. And I decided that what I would do is reinvent myself and reinvent a new life, and come back with not just the information that I had about 9/11, but I'd come back with a new identity that they wouldn't recognize until it was too late, in order to find out all of the things that make their world work, so I could expose every criminal element of it, in order to bring it down in the most peaceful and efficient manner possible. And what I did to do that, we'll get onto in this obviously the next section. But if there's anything else that you want to ask me at this point about what I've said or anything that you'd like me to focus on, please let me know now.
Yeah, so what's interesting about this, especially at this point in time, is so many people are focused on Israel and sort of have this presupposition that Israel is the control mechanism for everything that's happening in the world and all the things that are going on. And I don't dispute the reality that many American politicians, as an example, have dual citizenship with Israel. But what you're pointing to is what I've come to understand as well, uh, in that the UK and really the city of London and really the banking families are what's truly the control mechanism behind everything in the world, behind all the orchestration of everything.
Yes, 100% correct. And that was confirmed by my Bilderberg insider, Paula. She confirmed because I asked her, I wanted to know, I already had an inclination that the bankers were controlling everything, that every war was a bankers' war, or more accurately, banksters' war. And I asked her, and she said, 100%, there is nobody and nothing that is not controlled by those private vested banking interests. And I also asked her specifically, is it true that Rothschild controls the rest, including Rockefeller and all of the other banking families, that they're all dependent for their origination and success in banking? They're all dependent upon the Rothschilds in some way. And she said there is nobody and nothing that is not somehow dependent upon the Rothschild cartel.
Wow.
None, none whatsoever. This is a woman who was on the same table as Margaret Thatcher at Bilderberg dinners during two separate Bilderberg meetings. She met with them all, she talked with them all, and she had it from Thatcher's mouth. Thatcher admitted that Kissinger and the Bilderbergers had tried to get her to give up British sovereignty and the pound. And when she refused, she was sacked. But she wasn't sacked by any politician in London. She was sacked by Bilderberg.
Mm.
And that was common knowledge among everybody in those circles. So when I discovered these things, as well as, by the way, Paula told me, this is 2001 too. Paula told me they were planning, i.e. the Bilderbergers and the cartel, they were planning to do exactly what they did in 2020, a fake viral pandemic. They were planning
Wow.
it back then. And
Wow.
they said, only the idiots will fall for it.
Right.
That's what they said. That's how arrogant they are and hateful.
Mm.
So finding all of this out and knowing that nobody would believe me, and they didn't. It didn't matter who I told. And she also told me, again, 2001 too, she told me MI5 and MI6 and Mossad were already planning a London event, and it would take place in July 2005, and it would include at least one tube station, and that would probably be Edgware Road. And that's exactly what happened. And
Wow.
everybody I tried to tell laughed at me. They laughed at me. So I ended up leaving London and going to Amsterdam, like I said, and I was there when I was blacklisted. However, when I came back, what I discovered was the the type of work that I immediately knew that I wanted to do, because this is something that I don't. Maybe some of your audience have had this experience where in your life you're given, God gives you a blank slate to literally. There's nothing that is going to prevent you doing anything that you choose to do with your life. Well, I was in that position. I had no responsibilities, no children, no dependents, and I wasn't attached at the time. I had no business. So I decided that what I would do is attempt to create a series of remedies that would negotiate fair settlements of disputes in their system. And they would include a way of getting out of fraudulent claims by banks. Because I knew that if we rid the world of banking fraud, then, because this is from my own research, I've discovered that every single bank loan in the world, at least in the Western world, and most of the rest of it, every single bank loan is fraudulent. And this is simply because the banks do not lend a single penny of their own money.
Right.
They simply steal the credit of their customers by pretending that the paperwork their customers sign is not money. because it is in the form of a promissory note, or promissory note made payable to the bearer, more like, and they get their customers to sign these instruments, they bank them in a private account, and then transfer the funds to their main account at the bank, and then pretend that they're lending their own money back to the customer, but it's the customer who created the credit. Once I discovered that, to be honest with you, I thought once that single fact is exposed to the world, then that will be enough to bring the entire fraudulent parade down. But it wasn't, of course, because the frauds are so complex and so endemic and so extraordinary that virtually no one will believe it's happened to them unless they experience it for themselves or they learn about it themselves. So it was going to take more than that to convince people. And it was also going to take more than me getting out the word about 9/11 and what really happened and who was behind it, which is why I haven't made a film about that yet. Because quite simply, people will say the same thing. Oh, but how do we know it's true? Well, it is.
Well, it's the same thing when I speak about virology. It's the same exact thing. Like
Exactly.
we have,
Exactly.
I guess you could say two opposing uh, ideas for what is occurring amongst the masses, and it's either that it's like what Aldous Huxley laid out, or it's what Orwell laid out. And this is coming from a brilliant episode by Yerasimos and Joel at Here for the Truth. They're talking about this, and I tend to think that it's kind of a mix of both. But the more that I think about it, it's really leaning towards Huxley, because it's not that the information is necessarily being suppressed. It is to some level, but like you can find this information. I think just most people don't care about it. Like I have conversations with some of my family members about what I've come across and have all the facts to substantiate what I'm saying, and it's like they just don't care. It's most, I won't say most people, but many people just don't care, or they don't want to know.
That's exactly right. And that's why I gave up trying to persuade people to look at that type of information or to listen to what I'm trying to express to them. In the end, when the beast comes and bites them on the ass, that's generally when most people sit up and take notice,
Right.
because it's affected their life or their loved one's life, and they have to do something about it. And I really didn't want it to be the case that it would take millions and millions of people being wronged by the state right across the world, as happened during COVID with those killer jabs and their maiming qualities as well. I hoped it wouldn't come to that, but I do honestly believe that we will look back on this time and we will say what happened then determined what happened next, because I don't know what it's like where you are, but where we are, you couldn't have conversations about even what they're spraying in the air.
Right.
4 years ago, with people who came to the door to deliver stuff or people you meet in shops or on the street, you couldn't have those conversations. Now you can talk about the chemtrails, you can talk about the killer jabs, you can
Yeah.
talk about the fact that there's no evidence that COVID existed, and they'll all happily have a conversation with you and tell you how they'll never trust the government again. Is it like that where you are?
Absolutely. And I have something that I want to bring up with respect to that, and the Rothschild family, and let's say even Klaus Schwab and all of these so-called nefarious actors. We The things that they're doing are traumatic in nature. I do not dispute that. But I also look at them as a beautiful gift in that they've helped to wake up so many people. They've almost acted as a sort of alchemical catalyst for us to then take the dark things that are happening in the external world and also within us, and have to look at them and face them, and alchemize to create gold, right? To create a better life. And I wonder if at the highest level, and I don't know, this is speculation. I just like to hear your thoughts on this. The Rothschild family and these other nefarious actors know that they're playing that role. They know that what they're doing is demonic, for lack of a better term, really like horrible, wicked, but it's necessary for the growth and birthing of something new, something better.
It's a very good question, and it's one that I have pondered myself. So I understand why you raise it. Having, as I've given your audience a brief overview of the type of people that I was having to fraternize with during my time as an international film producer. And having met a lot of them, and having met some from the cartel itself, and having met quite a few people who have met the Rothschilds, I can tell you for sure they don't believe that they're doing anything good at all. They believe that they are inverting everything. Their religion is Sabbatean Frankism,
Right.
and they are descended from the line of the Sabbatean Frankism line, derives from Sabbatai Zivi, I'm sure you know.
Right.
And Sabbateanism and Sabbatean Frankism is the real religion behind everything that's happened since 1666. Absolutely everything. And that is that the cartel came together because of Sabbatai Zevi declaring that the Messiah, which he declared was himself, that he, once he died, would come back to this earth once the Sabbateans, or the Sabbatean Frankists, had brought about an inversion of good for evil. In other words, when everybody believes that everything evil is really good and vice versa, that's when they believe their Messiah will come back. The Rothschilds are attempting to bring about that Sabbatean Frankism inversion, or Kabbalistic inversion is another way people say it, or satanic inversion. But if you see, it's like, lawyers don't practice the law, they break it. Doctors don't heal people, they make them ill. Educators don't educate, they misinform. Bankers don't lend money, they steal it. It's just everywhere you look, there's just an inversion. And of course, male is female, female is male. They don't, and then they don't exist, and all the rest of that mumbo jumbo. And literally, they're getting away with it because they've scared people into simply expressing their opinion when they think somebody is wrong, just in case they offend them. To be quite honest, I think that is the greatest weapon that they've used. The self-censorship that we saw from people, especially during the early stages of COVID, it was appalling. It really was appalling. They wouldn't say what they thought because they were scared that others would think down, or think unkindly of them.
Right.
And to be honest with you, what I found, and I'm pretty certain that you feel the same way because you had a similar trajectory during COVID as I did, because you were speaking out very loudly about it all, as was I. And when I did, what I found to my, I took great heart from the fact that when you did put your head above the parapet during COVID, there were far more people who supported you for doing it than there were who ever attacked you for doing it.
100%.
One of the things I think that encouraged so many people to speak out.
Yeah, I
Do you agree?
completely agree. I completely agree. I want to touch back on something related to the promissory notes and how all bank loans are fraudulent. And that's something that I wholeheartedly agree with. And I want to take it a step further in that there's different schools of thought regarding the jurisdictional authority that government in general has over us, right? And there's some people who will say, okay, I never signed anything myself, and if I did sign something, I didn't have an intent to contract, and there wasn't an actual contract because it was just me signing the document and not other people. Therefore, all of those so-called contracts are totally invalid, and the government has no authority over me just by me becoming aware of that and expressing verbally, in whatever capacity, that they have no authority over me. But then there are some who will say that, well, because the whole of society has come to accept that these are legitimate forms of contracts, even though there's not two parties signing, it's just the way that it is because society accepts it as such. And then others will say that, well, no, these are a form of contract because they're what's called either a tacit agreement or they're adhesion contracts, where you have been sort of pushed into these contractual relationships unwittingly, either by your parents signing documents or by you signing documents, but nonetheless, they are contracts because you have signed them, irrespective of whether you were aware that there was, a contract in place. You sign the documents. I would just want to hear your thoughts between those three uh, perspectives.
It's a very interesting question to ponder, and it's one that I have, again, significant experience in. So the first issue, the issue of jurisdiction and whether or not the government has an automatic right to claim jurisdiction over everybody, no matter who they are, if they're born within a certain nation state or naturalized there. So this again, the easiest way is to relate to my own direct experience. In 2008, I did something which emphasizes what my view is on that issue. I know, because of my own experience, that I was born with sovereign rights that could not be taken away by anybody, to do that which I chose with my life, including consent or contract with anybody or anything I deem fit and necessary for whatever purpose, but not when I don't know what a contract is and what an agreement is and what a tacit agreement is. And the reason why I say that is because one of the things that I've had to research very deeply is the subject of fraud. I know fraud as subject matter inside out, criminal and civil and international. And I'll come back to why I did that, because I had to get involved in various legal proceedings, assisting my family. But we'll come back to that when we'll talk about the banking fraud specifically. But the jurisdictional issue, so in the event I'm correct, and everybody is born sovereign, a sovereign is able to choose whatever they do without being impeded by anybody. No one can tell a sovereign what to do. So if that's the case, I can say that I exist in my own private jurisdiction with whomever I choose, and they consent to be with me within that jurisdiction, and there isn't anything the government can do about it from a legal or lawful perspective, because that's an absolute fact. In other words, if you declare yourself to be free from the jurisdiction, then as long as you act like you are and give up all your benefits and privileges from the state, then they have to leave you alone. And I know this because I did it. I revoked in September 2008, I sent a notice of understanding and an intent and a claim of right to the former Queen, declaring that I was revoking my consent to be governed by a government that I considered to be criminal in nature, and that I would not give a single penny of my monies or assets to a regime that I knew for a fact was killing other people's children on foreign shores. And I got no objection. I got no response either, but I went on to submit further notices, a declaration of sovereignty. The declaration of sovereignty went one further than the notice, and it literally declared that I was a sovereign, independent, autonomous individual who could not have statutes imposed upon him. I can only consent to whatever it is that is going to happen. And what I did was I declared every single contract, and including adhesion contracts and the hidden invisible contracts, I declared every single one of those to be null and void at law, as they are, because in fraud, when a fact needs to be disclosed and isn't disclosed to a party and it causes them losses, whatever the action is nullified. In other words, whatever contract exists or they think exists is a nullity and cannot be enforced at law on the basis that they didn't disclose facts prior to the execution of it. And because of that, that also means the other questions are pretty much answered. So with the jurisdiction, there is no jurisdiction if you declare that you are under your own jurisdiction or under the jurisdiction of another actual jurisdiction, which isn't the government's. So those are facts. But also in terms of the adhesion contracts and the other types of invisible contract and the tacit procuration of consent via dishonest means, whenever fraud is committed, whether it's non-disclosure, abusive position, or false representation, Whatever the action is nullified. So the contracts are nullified every single time and they cannot be enforced. And this is how I managed to get out of multiple fraudulent contracts with government entities of all natures and descriptions and banking entities of all natures and descriptions. So I know it works. It's not just theory.
Wow. So a lot of people in the freedom movement, let's say, would listen to what you say, of which I completely 100% agree, and say something to the effect of, well, it can't be that easy. There's just no way that we can get out of their jurisdiction just by expressing that we are no longer under their jurisdiction. Tell the audience why why that idea is completely not true.
Well, the reason why it's completely not true is because there is, as long as an individual is not causing any harm, injury, damage, or loss, no crime or civil offense is being committed. And therefore, whatever it is that they're doing that doesn't cause any of those offenses to happen can't be objected to or complained against in a civil or criminal jurisdiction. Can't be. So therefore, if it's not as simple as declaring that you're sovereign and you're existing in your own jurisdiction, how could it be that I was able to create my own jurisdiction? And I did it first and foremost as an individual declaring sovereignty. And then as a sovereign, because there was no objection legally or otherwise from the Queen or Her Majesty's government to anything that I did revoking my consent to be governed and declaring my own sovereignty, that meant at law they'd acquiesced to my proposed course of action.
And
So
that's based
what's
on, real quick, that's based on an unrebutted affidavit stands as fact, right?
correct?
Right. And
Correct.
that's in
Yes.
the Uniform
Absolutely.
Commercial Code, which and in other regulatory, bodies of work, if you will, and that's in their own codes, acts, and statutes. What I just shared here. So by their own codes, an unrebutted affidavit stands as fact. So he submitted an affidavit, submitted a notice saying this, this, and this, and they did not rebut said affidavit. Therefore, it stands as fact.
Yes. Exactly. Exactly. So once I got to the point where my declaration of sovereignty was standing in law, I used it to create an entirely new government-free, tax-exempt jurisdiction where only people and their businesses, indigenous people all over the world and their businesses, can stand within this jurisdiction to protect themselves. I created it with the idea was to create a system that would identify what the problems were and eradicate them by completely peaceful, non-confrontational means. In other words, what I decided to do was create a new jurisdiction where a new type of civilization could exist, a civilization where government and regulators could not arbitrarily interfere with the workings of our daily business the way they do. They could not tax people to the point where they can no longer survive running a business and or as individuals as they do, because the whole system is not set up for individuals and their businesses to do well. It's set up for us all to struggle. And once I understood that jurisdiction was key, all I had to do was create my own and then see if it worked. So first thing we do to create the jurisdiction, it's not as simple as getting people together and saying, let's all stand in this jurisdiction. You have to do something that is recognized under international law. Otherwise, it's not going to work. I've done that as an individual, but I needed to do it on an international level. So what I did was, as I said at the beginning, I love to write. There isn't anything I can't write. And I set about writing my first treaty. I've written a few since, but I set about writing a treaty called the Treaty of Universal Community Trust. And I made this treaty to create that jurisdiction, but to also to put flesh on the bones of the things that I'd been presenting as a skeleton for how we would go about getting out of the mess that we were in. And all of a sudden, when I saw the reaction that people were having to this concept of universal community trust, where people would simply organize themselves much better than people have been organized for a long time without government and without the imposition of all those laws that are not serving mankind or the earth. They're just serving that self-appointed elite of scum-sucking parasites that we need to get rid of. But we can't get rid of them, as Buckminster Fuller said so wisely in the 70s. We can't get rid of those parasites and the self-appointed elite by confronting them with violence or rising up in arms, because that's what they want us to do, so they can crush us, so they can bring the jackboot down on who isn't able to rise up with arms. The only way to stop a tyrannous regime and to end it forever is to build a new system or a new civilization that makes their system obsolete over time. And that's exactly what Universal Community Trust is. And we built the international jurisdiction for it to exist in before we even started putting the bricks and mortar of it together on the ground, because I knew that that was critical. First of all, we needed a jurisdiction to exist in and to protect everybody from the tyrannous jurisdiction. And when I did this, I also did something which is a major test of what I'm saying. And it's a reason why people should look at what I'm saying, and they should think, I'll have a look at all of the stuff that man's put out about this subject, because you really should check that everything I'm saying is true, because it is. And when you find what I put out there, you will see that what I did in 2011 was I cancelled, because I'm in my own jurisdiction and I'm tax exempt, I cancelled my registration as a taxpayer, which is another one of those adhesion contracts, the invisible contracts that my parents made for me. Well, I cancelled it on the basis that I never consented to it. And HMRC, that's our version of the IRS, for everyone listening in the States, HMRC, they threatened me with legal proceedings. They said, we're going to take you to court if you don't give us the last 7 years worth of tax returns and pay what you owe. Well, I didn't. And I said, no, you can't prove that I'm a taxpayer in your system. Therefore, I'm not going to do that. And if you take me to court, I will fight you. And I'll use all the tools that the law allows me to use to beat you in that legal proceeding. And in the end, HMRC, the head of debt collection at HMRC, backed down. And they even sent me a rebate for 140 odd pounds. It was money that I'd overpaid in tax, but they haven't come after me for a tax return or any payment since. That's since 2011. And my national insurance account was also cancelled. And there's been no correspondence from HMRC regarding any change that they require me to make in relation to my cancelled tax account, because it's established. I cancelled my registration as a taxpayer, proving that I was in my own jurisdiction and couldn't be taxed. Right. So all I've done is I've created the huge jurisdiction worldwide for everybody to stand in. So I've proven at law, I did it. I proved that I wasn't a taxpayer. And then I created a jurisdiction for others to stand in, to establish that they are also exempt from taxation, but not just people, businesses as well.
If you're enjoying this episode, please consider sharing it with at least one friend or family member who you think could benefit from hearing it. You help us grow and reach more people by sharing it with those around you. Also, be sure to head to the show notes to check out our membership offerings, membership marketplace, and more. We all know that Big Ag is poisoning our food supply, and Big Pharma's so-called medicine is straight up poison. What most people aren't aware of, though, is that most supplements are also filled with artificial sweeteners, dyes, GMOs, glyphosate, and a host of other toxic ingredients, even many of the more natural supplements. My good buddy James Benefico dedicated his life to crafting the world's cleanest, most nutritious organic supplements after a pre-workout energy drink caused heart palpitations so severe that he almost landed up in the ER. Organic Muscle was born, revolutionizing sports nutrition by using exclusively non-GMO ingredients from USDA organic farms. Since then, tens of thousands of people, including myself, have leveled up their fitness and their health with Organic Muscle's award-winning natural pre-workout. There's no jitters, no heart palpitations, no itchy skin, just nourishing organic food and herb-based ingredients for clean, sustained energy, strength, endurance, and recovery. Numerous studies have shown that Tonka Ali is the most effective herb in the world for naturally boosting testosterone levels. And we know that testosterone levels are depleting all over the world because of what's put in the food supply, what we're exposed to, Organic Muscle has the world's first fully organic Tonkat Ali supplement. I only support and promote things that I actually use, and I can say I legitimately use Organic Muscle products. Use code FORWARD15 at checkout for 15% off at organicmuscle.com. Obviously, it's incredible to hear that. And there are so many people that I know in the United States who have had success doing virtually the exact same thing with some minor variances with the IRS and other agencies of the US government as well. And a lot of people in this sort of anarcho capitalist voluntarist space will reference what Larkin Rose said and what happened to Larkin Rose, where he was thrown in jail. And I don't know the exact details of what happened with Larkin, but what I can say is that if you enter into a contract with, again, these are adhesion contracts, but a contract with the IRS, and you are filing all of these forms with the IRS. And then after you've filed these forms and continued to file them, and then once they send you a presentment to pay and you don't respond, right? Or you just try to not file, that is also a problem that you're first off still under their jurisdiction, and then second, you are not rebutting what they're saying, so you're, putting yourself on the hook. There are ways you have to go about this in order to remove yourself from their jurisdiction, and it's putting them on notice, and then when they send you a presentment, putting them on notice again, responding, asking them questions. There are so many different ways to go about this that get them to just shut up and go away. There are actually ways to remove yourself from their jurisdiction.
There are. They will argue with you. They will tell you how much they don't like it, and you'll get into serious trouble. Or once they realize, as they did when I established around about the same time as the tax remedy, when I established in 2011 or 10, 11, a remedy for refusing to register the birth of a child, which is subsequently being used by thousands and thousands of people to do it successfully. When I did that, there was a massive consternation from the local government, because every registered child results in a big lump sum being paid to every local borough where the child is registered. And because they were so unhappy with me refusing to register the birth of my daughter, along with her mother, we took on a legal process, which I created, and we got to the end of it. And again, the Registrar of Births and Deaths lawyer threatened us with court, just like HMRC. But we said, look, the law allows you to fine us a maximum. At the time, it was a maximum fine of £4 for not registering. Said, look, if you impose this fine upon us, we will, under protest and duress, pay the £4, but that is the worst the law will do to us if you take us to court. And they didn't know this. And when they found out, they dropped everything. They dropped everything and sent us a letter saying, you do realize that your child will never be able to get into a state school. Untrue. She was home educated anyway, but it's untrue. If you wanted to get into a state school and you weren't registered, it's easy. It's really easy. I know people who've done it. Then they said, oh, she'll never be able to travel because she won't be able to get a passport. Within 2 weeks of us not registering her or completing the process, within 2 weeks of that, she had a passport, and she's now on a second one. So that was also proven
The
to be
same
incorrect.
thing comes with driver's license or any of these individual contracts in which you sign. You can still sign them and engage in a contractual relationship, but the thing that people don't think about is you can amend the contract yourself to say what you want it to say and then submit it back to them, right? In order to receive whatever that thing is that you want to receive. Let's say it's the driver's license for those that are in the United States. You can still engage in that relationship when you know the truth about these contracts and just amend the contract to your liking. That's it. And then still get the driver's license.
Well, yes, you can. Sometimes they won't accept what you want, the changes that you want to make. Sometimes they won't, but then you enter into a process, and there are various processes that you can engage in, and you end up getting them to settle on issues that they'll in the end say, oh, well, it doesn't really matter if you do it that way. Okay, we accept. As long as you're doing things lawfully, generally you can negotiate with people as long as you are. But what I would also say is the less you correspond with the state and the state agencies, the better.
Right.
The less you do. And I will also say that there are others who've given this advice over the years that I've listened to. And I do give the same advice, especially now. I would say never, and I mean never, go to court unless you haven't got a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say that, I mean, unless you have to go to court, otherwise you're going to be penalized, you're going to lose, or you're going to be harmed somehow by not going in whatever way, don't go. There's no reason to go unless you have to be there. Otherwise, there are going to be consequences. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because they will very often try and get you to engage with them in legal proceedings that aren't required for you to take part in. And this is a way they claim jurisdiction over you. Right. So in other words, you might think that you've revoked your consent to be governed, or you're outside of their jurisdiction. And then what you do is you decide to engage with them in a legal proceeding. And all of a sudden, they will have very tacitly established jurisdiction over you. So only go back into court on your terms, stating what they are. And the only time you can state what they are is when you know what everybody else's terms are. Right. So then you can make a balanced decision. So in other words, wait and see what everybody else does in court before you go there, if you end up going. And I'm talking from the perspective of someone who has a 100% track record in legal proceedings my entire life, self-taught, never went to law school, anything like that. I learned with literally throwing myself into the deep end, simply looking up whatever law applied to whatever circumstances, and then I learned a lot from that point. Now, when I say that I have that 100% track record, most of the time, and this is the vast majority of the time, I never have to go to court. It's all settled out of court, and it's always settled in my favor. Now, the way that I managed to do this is simply by establishing that I have a series of remedies that exist outside of the system, which can be used in the system because they're perfectly lawful in their system and outside of it. And when they're used inside of the jurisdiction of Universal Community Trust, well, to be honest with you, so to ask that question is a bit of an odd one, because inevitably we don't have the same problems under the jurisdiction of Universal Community Trust. We can use that jurisdiction to protect us from their system, but we don't have the corruption, fraud, and tyranny within the jurisdiction of Universal Community Trust. We only have people and businesses and nations, and the nations and nation builders that we're attracting worldwide are growing fast every day, because right around the world, people are drawing the same conclusions as you and I, Alec, and many of the people who are listening to this and that we're already talking to in private behind closed doors. They know the system's broken beyond repair. We need a new one, but we can't build the new system without a new financial system, which is why UCT, or Universal Community Trust, the jurisdiction, is not the only thing that we've built. We've built a trust called Universal Community Trust, which provides the infrastructure for all of the business of UCT to be done. And we have also created a new credit-based financial system and marketplace where all of the finance created is created by commercial paper negotiable instruments.
I knew we were going to go. I knew we were going to go here, and that's where I want to pause you, because I want to backtrack a little bit to provide some context for those who may be unfamiliar with the currency that exists right now. Right, the currency that exists right now. So let's go back and touch on what a promissory note is, and then go from there.
Okay. So a promissory note is essentially a piece of paper which has the following words written on it. I promise to pay the bearer the sum of, and then it says that it's due to be paid on a certain date, and it's signed by the maker. And as long as it has a place where it was made written on the face of the instrument, it's valid. It's got everything it needs to be valid. Now, that promissory note can be it could be deposited in any bank account, but generally you will have to go to a specialist type of bank account, such as a demand deposit or a private trust account, in order to get these instruments deposited if you're not a banker. However, if you talk about if you're talking about a promissory note made payable to bearer on demand, you're talking about an instrument which is no different from every banknote that you have in your pocket,
Right.
if you're lucky enough to have them, or in your account. It's no different, because that is the only form of money that currently exists, and it has been the only form of money that exists since the West and the rest of the world came off the gold and silver standards. In other words, all that there is that creates credit in their system is a promise to pay that
Right.
will never actually be honored.
Right.
So what we did, and if is that a clear enough
Yeah,
explanation?
I want to give an example though. So can you like explain as an example what happens with a mortgage?
Yes, that's a really good
Yeah.
example. So
There's a reason
there are
the reason I've asked that one specifically.
okay. Well, with a mortgage, there are slight variations depending on which country you're in. But given that I have an expertise in UK mortgages and they're pretty similar to US mortgages, I'll talk from that perspective. Basically, a mortgage. This is what happens in this country and around the world. So let's say a couple go into a bank wanting to buy their first home, and they speak to the mortgage broker, and the mortgage broker says, right, okay, you can have this mortgage with this bank to buy your dream home, and all you've got to do is sign this piece of paper here and this piece of paper here. In Britain, those two pieces of paper would be, first of all, a promise to pay, the exact amount of the mortgage, which the bank then takes and then deposits in a private account, then transfers the funds to its public account at the branch to pretend that they've lent the mortgage money to the purported borrower, who isn't a borrower at all. That's the first piece of paper. Second piece of paper is a deed, a mortgage deed, which is granting normally an interest, i.e., a mortgage interest, over a property that the people granting the interest haven't even bought yet. So they don't own it. So the bank or their lawyers are asking the pretend borrower to grant a mortgage over a property before they own it. That's fraud in the factum, or fraud from the outset.
Right.
And no one in a court of law can deny it. You don't have the right to grant an interest over a home you don't own, but they get you to do it. Why would they get you to do it if they weren't stealing the funds from you? Because they don't just steal the funds that are created by the promissory note. They deposit the mortgage deeds and they get paid again on top of the promissory note. And sometimes they hypothecate the instrument and they sell it many times to many different people. So who knows
I
how many
think in
times they get
virtually
paid.
every case in the United States, by the way, when it comes to mortgages, they hypothecate it and sell it many times. That note is sold over and over and over and over and over again because a lot of people in the United States, I know you've cited all these factual you know things that occur in the UK and have not had success. The in the United States, maybe because we haven't succumbed to tyranny as much as the UK has, I know people who have been successful, it took some time, in discharging their mortgages because they were able to track down which bank held the note. And that was the problem, is trying to find which bank actually held the note for the home in order to discharge it. But
Yes, that's the difference with your system. You actually have a mortgage note. We don't. We have the deed instead.
got it.
And there is no mortgage note here. But I have discharged two fraudulent mortgages at the land registry, arguing these
Oh, that's
arguments. So,
great. That's great.
yeah, yeah. I made a film about it called The Great British Mortgage Swindle. Anyone can see it at thegreatbritishmortgageswindle.net. It's in the top menu. You can watch it for free. That's the story of me and a few other litigants in person fighting on the front line for 9 years against the fraudulent mortgage companies. And in the end, as I say, we won in our case with the argument that had previously been dismissed as totally without merit. So we won, but the problem is, even if remedy is possible for people like me, most people are never going to be able to get it in the system the way it is. It's too much of a fight for them, or it takes too much knowledge. And even if there are remedies available where you are, it's still founded on a system which is just as corrupt as it is over here, unfortunately.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
Yeah.
I have a quick question with I guess let me ask some questions to see if I can summarize this for the listeners. So
Mhm.
anytime something is presented to me and I sign it, right? I endorse it a certain way. That is then creating the funds in that act of me signing it. The moment that I give it back to the bank, the funds are then, for lack of, going into the great details, they're created out of thin air based on me signing it. And then go ahead. Go ahead. Do you have any comments on that?
Yes, that's absolutely 100% correct. That as soon as you sign it and give it to who you're presenting it to, so that's important. It's not upon signature; it's upon
Right.
delivery and
Yep.
acceptance. As soon as you've given it to them and they've accepted it, that's it. Payment's been made.
Right.
It's been made if the instrument is correct.
Right. And that's what's so crazy about this is that the moment that you sign and present it to them, the payment's been made. They've already been paid in full. And then you're making payments on top of that, and they're charging you interest.
Yes.
And that's what's crazy about it, like how fraudulent it is. And that's precisely why you can discharge, though, is because they've already been paid and they can't validate that you're actually in debt to them.
That's right. That's absolutely right, and that's one of the things that's one of the aspects of our remedies that has worked really well. We ask for material evidence of all the things that we know they can't prove, like that question that you just raised there, and many others like it. It's if they can't prove that they created, or if they can't get their accounts out and show you how they created the funds that they claim to have lent you, then they didn't lend you their own funds.
Well,
And
what's so
that's
crazy is in the U.S. codes and their actual code, the codes of the U.S. government, right? It states clearly that banks are not allowed to lend money. Banks don't lend money. It says it in the U.S. codes for banking in the United States.
yes, and similarly in the UK in 2013 and 14, in the Bank of England's quarterly bulletins, they were talking and they were hiding the information, but they were hiding it in plain sight. They said pretty much the same thing. They said, since the Financial Services and Markets Act in the year 2000, which made the City of London like the Wild West, but let's come back to that, they basically took the right to create funds away from the Bank of England and they gave it to the commercial banks, all of which are controlled by the Rothschild cartel,
Of
who
course.
also control the UK Treasury. So that's what they did. And they said, so since then, all money has been created by the banks making loan agreements with their customers. So they admitted, there you go.
Right.
Bank of,
Exactly. So,
yeah.
so now that we have established how fraudulent the current banking system is, and I want to say something that's really important, is that this generally applies all over the world. We're not just talking specifically to the US or the UK. This has sort of permeated every facet of the earth. And so, what is Universal Community Trust, which you've established, doing to basically flip on its head this inverted system?
Universal Community Trust has created its own treasury. UCT Treasury is its name. And UCT Treasury is already holder of fixed assets in the form of commercial paper fixed assets in the sum of in excess of 34 billion pounds. All of these assets are bona fide, checked out by the highest level in the legal realm and the banking realm, and everybody says they are 100% exactly as they need to be. No banker has looked at them without saying, yes, I can accept these instruments. And we have, as I say, in excess of 34 billion pounds worth of those instruments as fixed assets in our possession at UCT Treasury. What we're doing with those fixed assets is we are about, within the next few months, about to acquire our own private bank, fully operational and licensed, and it's going to be a Western entity as well. So it's going to exist within their system for as long as we need it to. And once acquired, and this is about to happen, we've been negotiating this deal for a number of months, and we're in a position where we have lots of people who are now queuing up to assist us in doing this because people are starting to get their heads around exactly what it is we're doing. We are creating with UC Treasury's fixed assets, the assets which are going to back the instruments that we use to create credit, not to create debt, to create credit. I'll just go, I'll basically zoom in on exactly how that's happening. The first type of instrument that we are depositing is a promissory note made payable to bearer. And the promissory note made payable to bearer is one that is acceptable from any UCT community worldwide, and any delegated representative of UCT who has permission to seek funding for any humanitarian or environmental project that doesn't offend the terms of the UCT treaty, they can get funding for that. Any business that needs to happen and can't happen in that world for various reasons, normally private vested interests. So we are creating the infrastructure, the financial infrastructure and the banking infrastructure, as well as the market infrastructure, for everybody to literally transfer themselves and all of their property and interests into the jurisdiction of UCT. And when they do, once the banking system is up and running, every individual and every business will be able to go to the UCT depository within their community, because there'll be one in each community, and they will get a template for a promissory note, which they need to execute, along with a form where they state what the purposes of the funds are. And as long as those purposes of the funds do not offend the terms of the UCT treaty and all related documents, then there is no problem creating the credit. Now, let's just say that an easy way to understand this is no more will that couple have to go to a bank and get a fraudulent mortgage to buy their home, to raise their kids. They will go to the UCT Treasury. They will execute their own instrument of credit, deposit it in their own account. Their account will be credited, and then they will have the funds in their account that will be transferable to any account worldwide to pay the vendor of the property that they want to buy, or whoever is selling whatever it is they are buying. So that's the first means by which we're going to be creating credit. The second means, and this one is one that has our adversaries running scared. When I realized that there were so many injured parties because of the fraudulent mortgage industry worldwide, in particular, but focusing on Britain, there are 11.2 fraudulent mortgagors in Britain. And I looked to find a remedy, or to create a remedy that they could use to cash flow damages payments. So I created a remedy called the lien process. A lien is a common law remedy, but it's a defense to any form of civil wrongdoing. So I created a specific lien defense for anybody who has been defrauded by any financial institution or any other party, really. So this defense, in the form of a lien, once perfected, has exactly the same effect in their system as a mortgage. In other words, once perfected, once properly executed and perfected, it creates credit. And it can be registered just like a mortgage over a property or over a business. And again, I will reiterate this, it's treated exactly the same as a mortgage in law, but it's not fraudulent. It's a remedy to fraud. So we have currently £17 billion. It's half the fixed assets that we have. In addition to the promissory notes and bills of exchange, we have fixed assets of 17 billion plus pounds in the form of those perfected liens. They've all been notarized and checked out by some pretty highfalutin lawyers, barristers and the like, and bankers again. And everyone says the same thing. When they understand what this instrument is, bankers have all said the same thing, which is, if you find a way of cashing these out, Michael, you'll see a stampede from the City of London to your jurisdiction. And I asked the banker why, and he said, because 85% of bankers in the City of London and investors in the City of London complain about having been shafted by a part of the Rothschild cartel. Wow. That controls everything. In other words, they've turned on their own too many times, stolen from them, stabbed them in the back, and they're looking for a way out. So because of this, we have investors including hedge funds that are queuing up to assist UCT in bringing about this new civilization, because they see that the future, this future that we've mapped out under universal community trust, this new advanced civilization without government, without taxation, where everybody is going to be free to do what makes their heart sing with their lives, because no one's going to have to work and slave just for a meager existence, just to put food on the table for their kids. No one's going to have to work like that, because the debt-based fraudulent system will become obsolete because of the credit-based system. And that is why I created it the way I did, or rather why it was masterminded in this fashion, so that we would eradicate all of the possibilities of fraud taking place in the new system. But the new system fits so perfectly into their system, because we're only doing what they should have been doing all along. And we're not stealing from the customer or the client. We're creating credit, and we're letting whoever creates it see the benefit as the law dictates and as the UCT treaty dictates, because we created the right to do that under international law, creating this new credit-based system with the UCT treaty, as well as everything else that we're doing to take down the criminal apparatus of government wherever we see it.
Beautiful. Wow. 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 So what would you say is the largest barrier to, I guess, the universal community trust success right now? Is it just getting the information out?
I would say that the biggest barrier is simply getting the information out
Yeah.
to enough nation builders quick enough. That
Yeah.
really is it. But we are spreading the word exponentially currently, where at the moment our average daily count for new nation builders coming in is 2 a day, and that is very, very good. It's better than it's ever been, and these are committed people. But we need it to be way beyond that. We
Right.
need it so high that everywhere you look, right around the world, UCT communities are forming and preparing the infrastructure for the rollout of the new system, including the credit-based system, because you have to have the infrastructure in place in order for it to work. But of course, what UCT offers, anyone who wants to join a number, all they have to do is go to universal-community-trust.org, and they'll get an option to join the mailing list. Once they join the mailing list, they'll get contacted by one of our number for an initial conversation about why they want to join and what they think they can offer. And provided that they are, the type that we need for the nation building that needs doing, because we're not looking for people who just want us to help them through their problems. We will help everyone we can, but we're looking for doers. We're looking for people who are ready to put something together, and all they need are the tools that we can provide them with, because we will provide everybody who wants to join with all the tools required to join, with all the tools required to get the remedies that they need as well.
Mhm.
And there's also mentoring within UCT involved for every nation builder. There'll be a mentor who helps them and assists them through the early stages through the probationary stages. But what has happened over the course of time is we've gotten to a point where everywhere I go and talk publicly, or UCT hosts an event, people are reacting differently to this subject matter now. People who did not even have a clue what was wrong with the world before 2020 are now telling us, thank God for UCT, because were we not this far down the road in planning the infrastructure to roll out when the credit is ready to roll out, which it's going to be this year, had we not done that, we wouldn't have the time to do it, Alec. We
Yeah.
wouldn't. This is years in the making. We've had many teething problems getting to this point. We've had to remove numerous infiltrators. As you can imagine, the secret services have been all over this like a rash, at least
Yeah.
in the early stages. But it got to a point where after they failed to frame me for crimes I didn't commit, after they failed to kill me and others by trying to poison us, there was even one UCT
Wow.
fair where the water supply was poisoned with arsenic, trying to take out as many of us as possible. And they failed, and we know, and this is everyone within UCT, they failed because this is a divine mission we're all on. This is us all coming together, and I mean all of us coming together, talking about these subjects, because we know we need a new system for the sake of our children and grandchildren. We cannot fix the existing one. It was broken beyond repair a long time ago, and all we really need to do to put it right is enough of us step outside of their jurisdiction into a government-free one where they can enjoy the protection that the indigenous peoples of the world have never enjoyed from tyranny and from government.
Beautiful. So universal community trust basically creates a new jurisdiction under international law. And then you
Yeah.
talk about nations and nation builders that fall underneath that. So what we're needing to do now is get more people to start their own nations, literal nations that fall underneath this new jurisdiction of universal community trust, which is based in common law and essentially self-governance. Like it is the first self-governance jurisdiction that, because they did not rebut your affidavits, your various affidavits, they recognize under international law as a legitimate jurisdiction.
Yes, yes, pretty
Yeah.
much. It is a natural law jurisdiction, but common law, true common law, is based upon natural law
Right.
anyway, which is
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yes, but it is. Yes, absolutely right. That's exactly what you say. And we already have, I believe the last count, because there's so many now, I believe the last count was 38 nations that we have right around the world, most of them in Britain at the moment, because we founded it, the whole organization in Britain, and the treaty was ratified here where with 26 British nations that were formed for that purpose. But now we've got people all over the world, including your part of the world, who are putting together nations, and these are real nation builders. These are people who know the Constitution isn't going to save us anymore. It's
Amen.
not. We need something else. And you know what? I believe the people who are behind every great document that people have ever relied upon in any nation state, I believe all of those people would get behind this universal community trust. They would see how obsolete government is. So why are we allowing governments to continue murdering 247 million people in the 20th century alone, according to the University of Hawaii, not including people killed in wars? Why are we allowing that to happen? I know that and I know you feel the same way, and many others feel the same way. We simply cannot allow it to happen to our children and grandchildren. We can't.
Well, the issue right now is that I can only speak to the United States here, but there are so many people in the larger freedom movement that are so fixated on getting, quote, Trump elected. I put elected in air quotes, or getting RFK, quote, elected, right? And this is the issue, is that as people were starting to wake up to the fraudulent nature of government as a whole over the last 4 years for obvious reasons, a candidate comes along who is saying very good things. Now we have two candidates that are saying what I consider to be very obvious, like so obvious, agreeable things that, because we have it contrasted against Biden, they look like they're saying something that is so miraculous and paradigm shifting. But it's just because Biden is so utterly inept that these other two look better. And because of these two candidates, people are sucked right back into the idea that the government can be changed from within, and now they're unbeknownst to most of them falling right back into the jurisdiction of this machine that doesn't have their best interest in mind, no matter who is put in that position.
Exactly. And that was very well put, because it is, unfortunately, one of the biggest cons that people have fallen for is the left-right paradigm. The left-right paradigm is a false paradigm, because what they call socialism or communism and what they call fascism or corporatism are actually very, very similar,
Right.
except in name. And the banks control everything in both concepts. And it's the same when you look at Trump and when you look at RFK, but for a different reason. But I'll say what I know about Trump in a minute, but because this normally is a killer for those who don't know it and are supporting him. But I will say about both him and RFK, there's one thing: I don't believe in voting in a bullshit democratic system which doesn't provide anybody with any sort of freedom. I wouldn't do it. But what I would say is, if I was that type of person who was going to vote in an election, I would say that what would stop me voting for both of them is that JFK has said that not all vaccines are bad. And when asked which ones aren't, he went silent and couldn't give an answer, because they all are bad. Every single vaccine is bad, and it can be proven. That's why I wouldn't vote for him, among other reasons. But I wouldn't vote for Trump because he's been bragging about warp speed vaccines, hasn't he, from the beginning of them being rolled out,
Right.
and claiming that he hasn't been getting the credit for getting them out there when those vaccines have killed untold amounts of people. And as
He's
they
also
have right
praised
around
the
the
use
world.
of ventilators. He also recommended lockdowns. He also indicted Julian Assange. We could go on and on and on.
On and on. But that's
Right.
what I'm saying. Even just one issue, the jib jabs themselves, that's enough. And
Right.
that would be enough for me without that list that you've got. And I know there's a big list. But what I know about Trump, and I'm so shocked that more people don't know this because I've been banging on about it for a long time. And it's been on my blog for a long time. By the way, in case people don't know, my blog is thebenician.net, and you can find an article which
I'll
tells
throw it in the show notes. I'll throw it in the show notes.
the truth is that in 1991, Trump was building a new project. I believe it was a casino hotel in Vegas, and he was really committed to building this casino hotel. And he overstretched himself, and he took some borrowings from Rothschild Inc., no less. And the borrowings that he took were substantial, billions he owed in the end, they said, but they were based upon, get this, they lent Trump money that was based upon what they described as junk bonds. So the junk bonds tanked, and Trump got a margin call for billions. And he was told he had to pay everything back in one go. And he couldn't. He was overstretched. He could go bankrupt. So he's called in for a meeting with the head of insolvency at Rothschild Inc., who'd been there for decades, Wilbur Ross, and some of you will already know who that man is, but others might not. So Wilbur Ross called him in for a meeting. And by the way, I'm taking all this information from an interview that Wilbur Ross gave to Forbes magazine not long after this happened. Wilbur Ross is standing, looking out of his window in his office as Trump drives up in his limo, surrounded by screaming fans as he gets out. And Wilbur Ross, in his own words, says, I saw the benefit and advantage of Trump's celebrity. So I called him in and told him that I would speak to Lord Rothschild and find a way around the problem, which is what I did. What they did was they wrote off those billions and called in the favor later on for Trump to play fake opposition when the time came. But he'd still be going along with the program like the rest of them.
Of course. I mean, even without that story, which is amazing that we have that. I wasn't aware of that. Even without that, though, it's so blatantly obvious for anyone with eyes to see and ears to hear. It's obvious that he's acting as the like fake opposition, especially because you know, as I've come to understand, the US government is literally just a corporation that exists within the District of Columbia that is ultimately at some level controlled by the British Crown, which are ultimately at some level controlled by the banking families.
Well, I almost completely agree. The US government and the UK government, they have corporations. They've had many corporations, and they are run much more like a corporation than any other entity. And the governments have been hijacked absolutely by that cartel. And they are controlled, as is the Crown. The Crown is controlled by the cartel. The cartel took control of everything. The Rothschilds took control of everything, and it's
Right.
documented. But again, no one talks about it. 1815, Battle of Waterloo in France between Britain and Napoleon. Rothschild was a major player in the London Stock Exchange at the time, and he used to get information via carrier pigeon before anybody else. So when he got the information that Wellington had won for the English against Napoleon, he made people in the stock exchange think that the opposite had happened and Napoleon had won. And he did this by walking in before anybody else, looking despondent, and telling all of his proxies there to sell all of his stock really short. So he was selling for a cheap price. Everyone panicked. It drove the price of everything down. And then he had separate proxies in the room ready for when it was driven down to buy up all the shares floated on the exchange at the time for pennies on the pound. And the vast majority of shareholders in those days were the Vatican, or the Church, the Church of Rome, the surviving royal families of Europe, and the rest of the moneyed aristocracies who had money to invest, the landed gentry, they used to call them. There was nobody else who lost any money. And in one fell swoop, Nathaniel Rothschild took control of the entire empire, but not just the empire of Britain, the empire of the Church of Rome as well, took control of all of the assets. So anyone telling you that the Church of Rome has secret control over everything via the Jesuits doesn't know that Rothschild, this is Amschel Rothschild in the 18th century, along with Adam Weishaupt and Jacob Frank, one of the Sabbatean Frankists, one of the key Sabbatean Frankists. They created the Bavarian Illuminati in order to set about taking control of all the secret societies from within, including the Jesuits.
Wow.
And they've controlled all the Vatican assets since, I believe it's around about the same time, 1815, but it might be a little after that. It's documented how they've controlled them. They control the Vatican Bank, and the Vatican Bank has controlled all the Vatican's assets. Anyway, they just got everything.
Wow. Yeah. So the point is that this idea that there can be someone who somehow subverts that entire system and is operating for good at the level of president is absolutely absurd. There's literally no chance that that's possible.
In their system, it's an absolute impossibility. It can't happen. Why can't it happen? Because the second anybody stands up and tells the truth about what the system really is, they're dead. They're dead, or they're framed for something that they didn't do, or they lose everything and they're never seen again. It doesn't matter how they get rid of people. They will just get rid of you. If you've made good off their system, you cannot betray it without suffering greatly. However, the point that I want to make about why I think the cartel has made a huge mistake with the internet is that I don't think they considered what we would do with the information. I honestly don't. I don't think they planned for what we've done with the information and what we're going to do with the information that they gave us, because the plan was just to control us and to feed, and even force feed us, if necessary, the information they wanted us to have. And they've tried to do it, but the real information still won't disappear. And people are reposting it, and it's not going away. And I think this was a huge error. And all the algorithmic predictions, I don't know if you've looked into them. It does amuse me when I do. I don't look at algorithms very often, but when I do, I'm always asking questions like this. What will happen if everything continues to make the progress that it has over the course of the next 3 years? I've been asking questions like that of algorithms for a few years. And when asked, the algorithms are predicting, if everything, this is this year, if everything stays the same, and the continued rate of progress on every level continues to happen, then the old system is going to die out and become obsolete and be replaced by a new one. It's not naming the new system, but the new system is Universal Community Trust. There's no doubt. There is no other, so it has to be.
Beautiful, man. So the main thing is getting more awareness and getting more nation builders for Universal Community Trust. So for those who are listening or watching this, please head to the show notes to check out Universal Community Trust and everything that Michael is doing. Man, this is this has got me so excited. I'm excited for the future. I know we're existing in a chaotic and tumultuous time, but I think that, like the nefarious actors didn't realize with the creation of the internet, they thought that it was going to sort of just be a way for them to continually feed us propaganda and really push us down. They forgot the nature of the human heart and our connection to God and our connection to each other and what that can create. And I think because of that, this chaotic and tumultuous time is really just the necessary alchemical process to birth something that is the golden age for those with eyes to see and ears to hear.
I got goosebumps all over my arms as you were saying that, and up my neck as well. I completely agree. I completely agree. And we've had conversations. I've had conversations among the people who are an integral part of UCT now, and they've been saying very much similar things, that, you know, even though it has been really painful getting to this point, and there's going to be more pain before it's over, it does seem like there isn't anything that can stop this. And it is divinely inspired. We are on a mission from God. You know, it isn't a joke. It's for real. Because this is absolutely what the Creator would want us to do with this world. And one thing that they always underestimate about mankind, I'm talking about adversaries, they always underestimate our ability to produce the unexpected result. And when we do that most often, it's when they place our back against the wall and they think we're finished. And that's when we'll do something extraordinary. Well, you see, when I look back at my own life, it's a microcosm for what you've just said. And again, I'm getting the shivers again. So in the microcosm, when my former life was completely and utterly destroyed, when I was blacklisted and couldn't work, and I had literally nothing left except myself and what I could do, when that happened, that gave me a blank canvas or a blank slate, like I said, to create something. And I look back on that part of my life and think, I didn't lose that part of my life. I gained this part, because one couldn't be without the other, and I wouldn't have it any other way. It had to be this way. I had to do it all under the radar with the people I've been working with in the way that we've been working. And now we're in a position where, like you say, our connection and protection from the Creator has enabled us to do things we would not otherwise have been able to do. And the connections that we've forged with people like yourself right around the world, with brilliant people everywhere who all are of the same mind. We absolutely need something new, and it has to be great. So we've got to come together and do it. We just got to get together and do it. That feeling, I wouldn't swap that for anything either, because that's the feeling of something of an idea whose time has come. That's what this is. People are ready for this now. They weren't 10 years ago, but they are now.
Amen. Amen. Michael, this has been an awesome conversation. I am honored to know you. I'm honored that you and your team reached out, and it makes total sense why you did, because I think we've been speaking a lot of the same language, and I am excited to help you find more nation builders and build more nations under the true jurisdiction. I would say the best way to put this is it's the jurisdiction of God, the jurisdiction of the Creator. So thank you so much for helping to birth that.
Yeah, more than welcome. It's been a pleasure, and thank you very much for having me on. I'm a great admirer, as we all are, of your work, and any assistance that we can give you, just say the word and it'll be there. But thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
In nearly all cases with modern health systems, you're waiting months for appointments only to spend a mere 10 minutes with a doctor who quickly hands out a generic diagnosis that is likely rooted in a total misunderstanding of health and causes, and then you're offered a one-size-fits-all medication or invasive treatments with unpleasant side effects. If this sounds all too familiar, consider a different approach with the New Biology Clinic, founded by Dr. Tom Cowan, a respected natural health doctor, author, and speaker. Dr. Cowan's holistic perspective on health and wellness and a deep understanding of the true nature of health and disease sets this clinic apart. With the New Biology Clinic, it's not about quick fixes and suppressing symptoms. The practitioners take time to understand your unique story, recognizing that health is unique to the individual and that illnesses have a variety of causes, physically and metaphysically. Members of the New Biology Clinic enjoy a flat monthly fee that includes a range of valuable services like health consults as needed, practitioner-led live streams on diverse health topics, access to a members-only resource library, and multiple live group sessions every month. These sessions cover fitness, breathing integration, biofield tuning, guided meditation, EFT tapping, and much more. Unlike traditional healthcare systems that thrive on frequent visits, prescriptions, treatments, and suppressing symptoms, the New Biology Clinic's motivation is to make you healthy and keep you that way. Visit newbiologyclinic.com to learn more and use code THEWAYFORWARD for $50 off your account activation. If you're a member of The Way Forward, email hello@thewayforward.com to receive $150 off your account activation. Your journey to genuine healing begins here.